Hello and welcome back to Balance and Bubbles. I'm Shannon.
And hi, everyone. I'm Amy.
And before we dive into today's conversation, as always, we love to invite you to just slow down with us for a minute. So if you are able, go ahead and grab something to sip on because every week we pair our conversation with a simple mocktail that you can enjoy along the way. This week's mocktail is our lavender lemon spritz. And I really love this one, Amy, for our conversation because spirit is really about creating space. Lavender has this calming quality that encourages us to slow down, while the lemon brings a little brightness and a little clarity to it. Together, they remind me that reconnecting with ourselves doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it just starts with a little pause and a little curiosity. And if you'd like to add a scent to your experience today, lavender essential oil is a beautiful companion to this conversation. It's calming, it's grounding, and it fits perfectly with the invitation that we are extending to you today to just slow down enough to hear yourself again.
And before we dive in, if you haven't joined our Balance and Bubbles community yet, this is a great time for you to do that. You'll find this week's mocktail recipe, our monthly shopping list, reflection questions, downloadable resources, event information, and all of our companion materials at www.balanceandbubbles podcast.com. If you're driving or folding laundry or out for a walk, do not worry about stopping right now. But if you have a minute, hit pause and then head over to the website and join us. We'd love to have you.
And we'll be right here when you get back.
I cannot believe, Shannon, that we are already at the fourth week of this series. We've talked about the body, the mind, and the heart, and now we're talking about spirit. It feels like we've been slowly working our way inward.
Yeah, Amy, that's exactly how it feels to me too. And honestly, I think spirit lands differently because we've already done some of the work. If our body's exhausted, it's hard to hear ourselves. If our mind is racing, it's hard to hear ourselves. If we're ignoring our emotions that we're feeling, it's hard to hear ourselves. And spirit isn't separate from mind, body, heart. All right. It's what begins to emerge when those parts are working together.
And I definitely think that it's important because sometimes people hear the word spirit and immediately they think religion or something really abstract, but that's not really what we're talking about today.
No, not at all. For me, spirit is really connection. It's our inner knowing that we all have our values, our sense of alignment. It's that part of us that recognizes when something feels true and when it doesn't. So, if I had to summarize the entire episode in one sentence, I think it would be this: slowing down isn't the goal, slowing down creates the space to hear yourself.
I think a lot of women listening right now will recognize this feeling, even if they've never called it disconnection. You can have a full life, a good life, people you love, meaningful responsibilities, and still feel like you've somehow drifted away from yourself.
Absolutely. And the tricky thing about that disconnection doesn't always announce itself dramatically. It doesn't come in screaming, right? It can show up as irritability or restlessness, maybe feeling unfulfilled, even when things look fine on paper, or just this quiet feeling that you've lost touch with something that's important.
I think that's why it's so easy to miss, right? Because you're functioning, you're getting things done, you're checking the boxes. And honestly, people around you probably think you're doing great. Meanwhile, you're thinking, why does this feel a little off?
Yeah, that feels right. And I think many women spend years prioritizing responsibility over connection. We become experts at showing up for everyone else, but somewhere along the way, we stop checking in with ourselves.
I know I've done that. I think I actually do that almost every day. So that again, that's why doing this podcast with you, I've already grown so much just from the first week that we've done this. I can get so focused on managing what's right in front of me that I don't even realize I've stopped asking myself what I need, what I think, or what I feel. I'm so busy taking care of everyone else or just the daily responsibilities.
Yeah, and there's a real irony in that, right? It's that for probably much of our lives, we have been rewarded for that. We've been praised for being dependable, for being the capable one, the one that's always reliable, that's there. For some of us, it's the person who can handle everything, but eventually there becomes a cost. There can be a cost to that. And because you're always responding to those external demands, it's really hard to start hearing or to hear our own internal voice.
And let's talk about intuition because I think people have all kinds of ideas about what that actually means.
So I do too, Amy. And honestly, I think intuition is much simpler than we make it. Most of the time, it's not some big giant warning flashing sign, right? It can be quieter, it can be more subtle, and it's often that first knowing before the analysis starts.
That's exactly what happens to me. I usually know I feel about something pretty quickly. I actually want to tell you a quick story. And I know so many women are going to resonate with this, but it was probably 2 years ago, and my daughter and her brother took a trip. They're both married. And so it was just those four. And they went skiing. And I remember waking up in the morning, I had just this gut intuition that something was wrong. And thankfully, it wasn't anything crazy. But Shannon, I literally got a call that my daughter had chipped her front tooth. My brother calls and he's like, just letting you know she's okay. But and they send me a picture and I was like, "I Shannon, I already knew it." It was the craziest thing. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's mother's intuition, but, it's interesting how, the brain gets involved sometimes, and then it starts building a case against it, but I'm a big believer you really gotta listen sometimes to that intuition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a story I can share with you too, but maybe we can do that later. Because I do think that um, there's a difference between the intuitive hits that we get all the time about
Mhm.
something being right for us or something not,
Right.
and then there's a much louder intuition when it involves, like you just said, like one of your children, or kinda like a big warning sign, and we could attribute that to a lot of stuff, which we probably won't take, in this
Right.
episode, but absolutely, intuition is something, but we can talk ourselves out of it pretty easy, right? So,
Absolutely.
and when we do, that's when the overthinking takes over, right? I used to think that clarity came from figuring everything out. I'd get all my little ducks in a row and then I'd have clarity. And if I could just think about it long enough, analyze it, plan it, I'd find the answer. And what I really learned is that clarity just really comes from creating enough space so that I can hear myself. And that's a very different process than having to be in there planning it and fixing it.
Yes, I love that because I think so many of us are trying harder when what we really need is just to be quieter. I know sometimes I always say sometimes you just need to be sitting still in the waiting room. Like it's okay. Even if you're, not making a decision doesn't necessarily mean you're not doing something you need to do. Sometimes not making a decision is allowing yourself the time and the space to make a good solid decision. And so a lot of times I'll be like, okay, I'm just going to be sitting in the waiting room to kind of sit here and listen, be still and listen for that intuition so I know maybe possibly a better decision to make.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really giving your conscious mind permission to not be working on everything, right? To allow that subconscious to kind of come up for us. Some of my best insights are in the shower. And I know that might sound funny to some people, but it's really one of the few places where my brain gets quiet. I'm not on the computer, I'm not, looking at something or anything. I'm just in there, being with the water and stuff. Um, there's nothing that's distracting me in the moment, and it's when we quiet that conscious mind that suddenly there's room for ideas and clarities and answers to surface. I even have I even have a pad that writes in the water. So I have it stuck on
Wow.
the shower wall with a
Yeah.
pencil so I can make notes because I get the best downloads in the shower.
We need to link that in the website. That's amazing. Some people might love that idea.
Yeah, it's super. I mean, I think I got it on Amazon, but yeah, it's cool.
I mean, that's brilliant. I think everyone has their version of that, whether it's the shower, driving, walking, folding laundry, those moments when you're not trying to find the answer and somehow the answer finds you. I
Right.
know for me, I think we talked about this. It would definitely be the shower, but if I'm upset or my emotions are getting the best of me, I tend to go for a walk. But if I
Mhm.
go on this walk, I wanna go by myself.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, just going on a nice, it usually takes about a mile, and then it's like, okay, I start to settle down a little bit. But, yes, definitely.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you highlighted there, Amy, is that important connection between the body, the mind, right,
Right?
and the spirit. Yeah, absolutely. That matters so much. This is why slowing down matters so much. And because slowing down is not the goal. If we were to say, well, you just need to slow down, how many arguments come up already with that directive? You just need to slow down. And you're like, I've got 15,000 things to do. I can't slow down. But slowing down does create that space for us to hear ourselves. And it might even be that heart focused breathing that we talked about last week.
And something else we've talked about is just that intuition doesn't always arrive as a thought. Sometimes it arises as a feeling. I'm definitely a feeler. I walk in a room, I can feel energy. When I'm listening to somebody else's podcast, I can feel whether there's joy and things like that. I can also feel tension immediately in a room. And I know not everybody is like that, but that's just the Pisces in me, the water sign. But I can also feel tight. I know that my body even gets tight when something isn't sitting right with me. And that's usually my first clue.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. And I know how you said I don't know if everybody can do it. I think sometimes, for yours hits in your emotions, right? And you feel that in your body. I tend to pick up on my emotion a little less physical and a little more energetically. It's kind of interesting when I work with clients sometimes, and I'll ask them, where do you feel that in your body? And before they tell me, I'm like, "Oh, my neck," and they'll be like, "Oh, I feel it in my neck," and I'm like, "Yes, you do." You know?
Oh,
So I
right.
think we can, and, not to get weird, it's not weird. This is really, I think, like we talked about the heart energy space, right? Of being 3 feet around us. I think that a lot of times we ignore those intuitive hits and don't really take time to figure out, how am I feeling this? Am I picking it up? Am I feeling it in my body? And is it intuitive in my head? Some people hear stuff a little differently. So I think it's really important for us to kind of figure that out for ourselves and notice when something feels off before you can explain why. Sometimes I'll feel resistance to a situation that I consciously have not figured out yet what's bothering me, but I've learned over time that it's not, don't judge it, don't override it, but just let it sit for a moment and figure out what it is. It's information, it's not instructions, but it can be information worth paying attention to.
And we've really talked about this a lot almost in every episode so far, is that the emotions are information and not always instructions. And I think that's probably one of another lessons that I've gotten from us doing this, is that because I am a feeler, a lot of times I think the emotion is telling me something that I need to do, or the instructions, and I definitely am learning. Sadly, I am a lot later in life that I'm finally learning that just because the emotions are there and big and real doesn't necessarily mean that you need to act on them, and that, like you're saying, it could just be some information that I need to sift through.
Absolutely. I think that, when you think about our generation and growing up, I don't know about you. I don't want to, broad stroke everything, but I know as a little kid when I would have an emotion on and would express it, and I'm kind of a fiery personality. So when I would have that emotion, I would be told, little girls don't act like that, or sit down and be quiet. "Oh, that's not okay. You take yourself to your room until you can behave better." And so I think that there can be a learning from being a child, and not putting blame on our parents and stuff, because they did what they could do, right? They did what they were raised with. But I feel like there's a little more awareness today, where I know my kids will talk through the emotion that their kids are having. Not that they allow them to be out of control, but it's like, okay, this is a feeling, and how do we want to work with it, kind of thing. So I think that we're just weren't taught some of that stuff when we were younger. Honestly, with the emotions being information, our bodies work the same way, right? That knot in your stomach, that tightness in your chest, feeling exhausted, or feeling expansive, right? Because we're kind of tending to say that emotions that give us kind of the, I want to say negative. I'm gonna put that in quotes because I don't think emotions are negative. I think that they can have a different impact on us. But there's also the good ones too, right? That kind of expansion, that
Right.
excitement, yeah, whatever that is. But those are all forms of information, and the goal isn't necessarily to react immediately. It's to really get curious about it, and wonder, what is this trying to tell me? What's going on?
I love that I'm gonna wrap back around to something before we go to the next point that we wanted to make, but I love that you bring up childhood because I think a lot of us, you can't blame your parents for certain things, but in your childhood, there are things that whether they still kind of resurface as an adult, or maybe you handle things a certain way because that's the way you was handled in your family growing up and things like that. But I think you bring up a great point in today's day and time. Emotions, I feel like in our generation, it was you needed to regulate your emotions, and now the parenting that's going on now is they are allowed to have the emotions, but then they do try to teach them the right way to regulate it. But back in our day, and I could be wrong, like, if anybody's listening, you may be like, "That's not how it was in our household," but a lot of times you didn't share things going on either, like, it was almost like, whatever happens in the house, we don't go out and tell others. So there was just a lot of different things when it comes to emotions that I feel like we've really grown as a society, especially for this generation of parents, and how they do allow their children to experience these emotions. But at the same time, they have to learn how to self regulate, which that is very hard. I would not want to go back to parenting a toddler. I'm watching, and so are you. We're watching our children parent their children, and it's definitely not the easiest thing. But one thing that I have noticed is that awareness doesn't necessarily make life any easier. Sometimes it makes things harder at first because once you see something, you can't unsee it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, can I respond to your first thought about, you know,
Yes.
how it was different? We can all have experiences and some things that we take from generation to generation, right? And so there was some things that I really wanted to work on, with my relationship with my mom. And I started doing some work, and I started getting a bigger picture of my grandparents' lives, my great-grandparents' lives, and then talking about my parents. And when you go back that many generations, what became super clear to me was they didn't have the luxuries that we had.
Right.
No, I mean, on not the typical working people, right? There were people who had more, but so the focus wasn't on my great grandparents worrying about whether or not their child had a feeling. They were worrying about how do they survive, and how are they
Exactly.
feed that child. And they typically, like my grandfather had 15 kids in his family, so you can only imagine how stretched
Wow.
everything was for them. And
Sure.
that was just really a awareness for me that came in, and it's like, oh my goodness, right? Here are these people who are in a survival mind only. I got to get these kids fed and raised and grown up. I don't really care if little Eddie is upset about something. He needs to get out and work in the garden, kind of thing.
Right. Right.
So that really just gave me some clarity of how our society has evolved because we have even our my parents, I'm a little bit older than you, but my mom was raised by parents who lived through the depression, as children, so they had that imprinted on them, that scarcity. So I just think it's really informative to think about, how what you just said, how we have grown as a society, and our children now they've had the safety and the space that we have given them as parents to then be able to even evolve that more when they're dealing with their kids. I think that's a really fascinating point.
It is, definitely.
Yeah.
And, I used to also think that, trusting myself meant feeling certain. Now I think trusting myself means being honest with myself,
Mhm.
and those are very different things. I don't know about you, but I think I've had the most growth in my life, uh, actually body, mind, heart, and spirit in my truly in my 50s.
Mhm.
I would say that is when I've had the most honest personal growth, and I don't know if it's just life teaches you. I don't know. It's interesting though.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And what I notice with a lot of women and myself included is that there is that space of being in your 50s, going into your 60s. I'm into my 60s and I enjoy my 60s decade as well. But it is a space that I think women are really starting to maybe question a little bit more. They're shifting out of that stage of raising children, working really hard in
Mhm.
their career. They might be at the end of their career, and that space is there where they're kind of going, well, what's next, right? What am I doing? What's important to me? A lot of questions come up, and I think that many women are kind of waiting for that certainty, right? That certain answer when what they're really looking for is alignment.
And what would you say alignment looks like or feels like for you?
So for me, alignment is really the feeling of calm, not necessarily easy. It might not be a comfortable place to be, but there's a sense of calm inside of me. There's not an urgency in this, fire body to have to do something or make something happen. And I find that my mind will really stop trying to solve everything. And then that allows me to become more open to insights and possibilities. And then that's where I feel like everything my spirit can expand, my heart can expand. Everything just feels less constricted.
I love that. For me, I think the answer would be uh when you say calm, I say peace, just that feeling of just peace, and
Mhm.
so I love the distinction because people often think alignment means having all the answers, and both of us, while our answers weren't the same, I think they were similar, right? But for us to feel aligned, it actually had nothing to do with having all our ducks in a row. It was, for you being calm, for me, it's being peaceful, so I love that distinction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that we do talk about that. Alignment isn't that certainty. It's not that for you it's coming back to center and feeling peaceful, is that calmness and then trusting yourself. I know once I hit that place of where I'm not on the emotional high or emotional low, but I'm kind of in that place of calm, that I can trust myself even if I don't have the answer yet. And that's honestly has become one of my biggest clues. If I'm feeling frantic or pressured or I feel
Mhm.
like I'm forcing something, I know I need to pause and get curious. What's going on? Let those emotions so that I can come to that space where I can actually think and breathe.
And so as you've grown in life, like I look we both have kids. They are grown and they have their own kids, but I think about the space you and I are in and it took us time to kind of get to where we're at. But my question to you would be for those younger listeners, you know, they probably aren't quite to the area where maybe they can just be like, "Oh, I feel peace, I feel calm," but what is some recommendations that you might give your adult children to help them navigate towards that space?
So I'm thinking about like things that I've said to, especially my daughter, but my son too. I mean, our boys need as much understanding of what they're going through and things like that as well. So I think one of the things I try, and there's a different conversation between my daughter who's in her 40s and my daughter-in-law who's still in her 30s and dealing with littles, because when you're dealing with littles, you're not getting the sleep that you need. You're
Oh,
not right. You're a lot of times eating on the run. And if we tell someone we create some space,
there's no
there's no way. They look at you like you have three antennas sticking off of your head, right?
yeah,
You
yeah.
know. So I think learning if they can learn some techniques to recenter, like we talked about the heart focused breathing, there's so many really good techniques out there that people can learn through breath work, I'm
Uh-huh.
a big proponent of emotional freedom techniques, and I've
Mhm.
taught both of my kids that. Even as an EFT practitioner, I don't always remember to use it on myself, but getting some tools in your toolbox that are easily accessible, something that they can do, and then make that time. And this is one of the messages that I have tried to share with my kids is that you're so busy. If your kids are in sports, your kids are in
Mhm.
school, you might be working, your spouse is working. And I look at my son and daughter-in-law's calendar and I'm like, oh, they're so busy, right? It's just like
Mhm.
work all week, these kids all weekend, this kind of thing. And they've gotten pretty good at taking that time, whether it's just an evening in the pool with the kids, or maybe my daughter in law does get that spa day, or dad does get to go on his, he likes to hunt, right? So he gets to go on his trip with the boys. So it is about really talking to them. What works for one might not work for the other, but it is talking to them about where can you find that piece that you can intentionally carve it out and put it on your calendar. Because if it's not on your calendar, it's not gonna happen, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I love that you bring up some of those things. I think with if people ask for advice or and of course, not that my kids ask for advice, but we give it to them willingly, right? Without them
Right.
asking. But I always tell them I have a 5-year rule. And so I always say if you're upset about something or you're spending a lot of time and energy on something that truly is not going to matter in 5 years, just let it go. Like if it's not going to be important in 5 years, then it's not important now. And then the other thing is I always say is when you are especially at the age that these young adults are in with the children is, make a pros and cons list. Whether
Mm,
it's you're thinking about moving, you're thinking about taking another job, you're thinking about buying a new house because they always want to upgrade or they want to do the next thing and I love making a pros and cons list because if you're honest with yourself, that pros and cons list is going to tell you immediately your answer, right?
right.
And so, but I think between the two of us that was some good stuff. Hopefully Hopefully
Absolutely.
yeah. I
Yeah.
hopefully some people get something out of that.
Yeah, and I love the pros and cons list because that puts something concrete for your prefrontal cortex to consider, right? Instead of it, running on the
Right.
emotions, you can actually see a list, and I love that because that, kind of takes the ambiguity and the argument out of it, right?
Right. And generally speaking, when you make a pros and cons list, you're honest. You're
Mhm.
honest.
Yeah.
And so it kind of forces you to dive into some of that. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we create that space that we're talking about, one thing I noticed is that I might feel if I'm not allowing that space or if there's some conflict between, heart and spirit or mind and spirit, that I might be irritated or resentful. We talked about resentment last week, with the
Yes.
heart and not having the boundaries and stuff, because it's not often because someone is really doing something wrong. It's usually because one of my own values hasn't been honored.
That is a great point, and you're so right. Sometimes it's not necessarily that emotion is the issue, but that exactly what you're saying, maybe of your own inner values is not being whether it's, needed, appreciated, or respected by someone else, and so absolutely, that's the clue.
Mhm. Yeah, that we go back to that emotions, the information. And when we get curious about it, we can start getting pointed towards what that's about. So, maybe a boundary needs attention. Maybe we had a boundary set in our head. We express it to the person that we are expecting to honor that boundary, right? So maybe we're saying yes when we really don't want to. Some of us really like to be um, pleasing everybody else.
People
And
pleasers.
yeah, we don't set that boundary. We say yes, and when we really mean no, or we really are trying to live in a way that's not aligned with who we really are. And I think for us as more mature women, the way we were when we were in our 20s and 30s might not be aligned with how we need or want to be today.
I'm gonna stop you there before we keep going because I can tell you, and I actually had this conversation. I've had this conversation with my sisters and my daughters, and I have told them that when I was 20 to 25, probably up into my 30s, I was little miss independent. I can do it myself. I can do it myself. And now, Shannon, now I'm like, I don't want to do it myself.
Yeah.
Like, I want someone to say, can I move that piece of furniture for you? I want someone to say, "Can I" and not everybody feels that way, but that's also just going back to being honest with where you are in life, but we change, and over time, many of those things, that you when you were 20 may not be the same thing as when you're, in your 50s.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not right or wrong, right?
Right, 100% not right or wrong.
Yeah, just the way it is. It's just the evolution. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Amy. That's so awesome. So sometimes something else that comes to mind is, how our brains are designed to work best when different parts of them are working together. So we often hear people talk about, oh, I'm left brain or oh, I'm right brain. But in reality, we're both. And we want to be both, right? We need to have that analytical part of ourselves to help solve problems, to organize information, and to make decisions. That's our left brain. But we also need to have the creativity and that intuition and being able to see like the bigger picture because the left brain focuses on the one thing and we need to have that ability to see the bigger picture to see the possibilities. So our right brain helps us with all of that and it helps us to make meaning and connections. So we really want them working together, not separately.
So it's not necessarily choosing one over the other, but it's having access to both.
Yes, exactly. And when we are stressed or overwhelmed or everything is chaotic around us and we're operating chaos, we often lose access to some of that integration. So then the brain will start to become more focused on the immediate demand. Typically, we'll become more left brained, right? Because we're trying to figure it out and we're trying to have answers
Right.
and we're focusing on that one thing. We're looking at what's next, what needs fixing, what problem do I need to solve, which makes sense because our brain and our nervous system is trying to keep us safe in the moment. But when we do that, it's really difficult for us to hear that deeper wisdom um, of our right brain. When our energy is just directed towards managing the moment.
That makes so much sense because when I get overwhelmed, it's interesting because I really feel like the word overwhelmed is sometimes overused because, I mean, we all can get overwhelmed over just about a lot of things. But when I get that feeling of overwhelmed, my world gets very small, I tend to retreat inside myself, and then I'm
Mm,
just trying to get through the day. I'm not thinking about alignment or values or intuition. It's almost like you're just in survival. I'm thinking about what's due, what's next, what I forgot, and I'm triaging, right? Like what has to be done right now.
yep. And that's why it's so important for us to slow down, even when we think we can't. Because when we can do some of the tools that we're talking about, right? Like the heart focused breathing, the going for a walk, taking a nice bubble bath, taking a shower, writing a list, whatever that is that helps us to come to a more quiet place, then we create those moments of stillness where our brains have the opportunity to reconnect and integrate, and then have a way of looking at processing information differently. We can access both the logic and the intuition, the analysis, the creativity. Our left brain brings in the facts, our right brain brings in the feelings, and it's not to stop thinking, but it is to think with our whole brain and to bring it all together.
I love that because some people might hear the conversation about intuition and assume we're saying to ignore logic, and we're definitely not saying that.
Yeah, not at all. I want both, right? I want both
Right,
my
right.
analytical brain to be working and my intuitive knowing brain working together. That's usually when I make my best decisions, when my body, mind, heart, and spirit are participating in the conversation. So, Amy, let's take a moment to slow down and let's give another little tool that people can have.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, just sitting in your chair, go ahead and just take a gentle breath, just a gentle breath in through your nose. And as you're sitting here, go ahead and notice your feet on the floor, right? You might feel your chair underneath you, supporting you. You might feel the back of the chair kind of supporting your back. And just let yourself breathe and just settle into that sense of being supported. And ask yourself, what do I already know that I've been ignoring? And just notice what comes up. No fixing it, no judging, no solving. Just listen. What might come up from your intuitive brain? Yeah. So so this is a really great exercise when you're feeling like you're overwhelmed, or, all the parts aren't working together, to really just kind of bring it all back together.
Shannon, before I move to the next item, are you willing to share any of your answers with what do I already know? Where is in my life do I feel calm? Where in my life do I feel pressure?
You want me to answer those?
Yeah, or just like any of them, one or just
Yeah.
anything that you
Yeah, so one of the things that you already know this, Amy, but I bounce back and forth between California and Texas quite regularly. My husband and I have our home in California and Northern California, and our kids recently, both son and daughter and families, moved to Texas about 4 to 5 years ago. And so probably the biggest pressure that I feel around that is the transitions that happen going back and forth.
Mhm,
Most of the time, I go by myself throughout the year, every 6 weeks to 2 months or something like that. And I stay for a period of time. And
mhm.
then my husband joins me part of the summer and then holidays. So I have really been sitting with, how do I make the transitions easier with me? Right. So I feel that, and what what helps me to be calm, because it's seriously a 2-day reset on either end. Sometimes a
Sure,
little if I've had a
sure.
longer travel and stuff. So yeah, so that's really where I have been probably the biggest pressure of figuring that out. So I'm not feeling like I'm restarting over every time I land
Right.
in one place or the other.
And you have 2 it's like 2 separate worlds in a sense because you go to one world and you've got all the kids and the grandkids, and so you're probably going nonstop, and then you go back to the other world, and so I could see how that's definitely it's also a mind shift, right?
Yeah.
Definitely for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what
Very
about you?
Oh, mine's easy. I have 3 grandbabies, all under the age of 3, and this is my own pressure. No one puts this pressure on me. It's just me doing it to myself, but I always wanna make sure that I am being equitable with my time and resources for them,
Mhm.
and, I mean, it's a little unrealistic because sometimes one needs more than the other, like, it's really unrealistic, but I just would always want for them all to feel that I am present for them, but that does take a lot of time, energy, planning, and, probably goes back to the mother's guilt, right? But
Mhm.
and it's never gonna be perfect, but that's just probably a little bit of the pressure in my life that I feel.
Yeah, I would say, Amy, that I love that you brought in that you're already seeing, well, this is probably related to mother's guilt, right? And the question that I might ask you would be, so where does that come from?
Oh, 100%,
You know,
100%. And I would love to know if any mother doesn't have mother's guilt. I would love to know. But
well, and
we can save that for another
we will
episode.
say that, but I think that would be a great question because where does that mother's guilt come from? You know, what is the impetus behind that? And it could be a different question for anybody. Could be a messaging that came down through generational pedagogy, right? It could be whatever it might be. But that's a value for you. And it would be really interesting to sit and breathe and let things
Absolutely.
integrate and find out where that is.
I think a lot of it has you always just want to be and this goes back to every single episode we've talked about. You want to be the dependable one to be
Mhm.
there for them when they need you, and it is definitely an unrealistic expectation, but it is an expectation either that we have taken on personally because of either the way we were raised, but I think it probably has a lot to do more with social roles
Mhm.
and not in every area, but I do think there's a lot of societal roles that, as the mom, we have to be the one that goes back to what we've been talking can manage it all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a big part of that that's there. And these are some of the questions that we can start to sit with because
Yes,
my guess is that this is a lot of might be have been influenced externally through being raised or whatever our community whatever that is and the actual guilt or the actual emotion that's around that is probably internally motivated, and so
absolutely.
maybe we can like start to untangle that a little bit so that
Right.
it's not as prevalent. Yeah.
So I'm excited because, and before we go, y'all, we would love to continue this journey with you. We really want y'all to email us feedback, questions, things that you want to know because hopefully we're hitting some things that you might say, "Oh, we would love for you to do an episode on this." Or even if you have suggestions for me and Shannon, feel free to throw those there in too because we are as we always say, we're not perfect and we really are doing this podcast to build a community so that we can, improve self-growth, reflect and hopefully have a space that everybody just as we say, come as you are. But you will find this week's mocktail recipe, reflection, questions, downloadable resources, event information, and all our companion materials at www.balanceandbubblespodcast.com. Just enter your email and we'll send everything straight to your inbox so you can follow along with us throughout the month.
Yes, I want to add to that, Amy, too, because we do plan on going live in the fifth week of all the months that have 5 weeks. So you'll also find that calendar there, and that'll be a great opportunity for us to have open conversation where everyone who's with us can answer questions or share their knowledge or wisdom around that as well. So we want to thank you for spending this time with us today.
And we never take it for granted that you choose to spend any part of your day with us. Again, whether it's 5 minutes or the whole full episode, we are just so thankful that you are even here with us. And so
Until next time,
come as you are,
reset
reset
off.
often.
We'll see you next time on Balance and Bubbles.
Bye bye. Take good care of
Bye.
yourself.